Hi everyone. The current slides and the reading is focused on hate crimes and the standards set by the European Court of Human Rights related to the efficient prosecution of hate crimes under the application of Article 2, 3, 8, connected to Article 14, the prohibition of discrimination. So basically on the slides, you see multiple references to certain bias indicators, since the national authorities have the obligation to conduct an efficient investigation and to do everything possible in order to unmask bias motivation behind the criminal conduct. And there you see a basic norm that if one bias indicator appears, then this obligation is there for the national authorities according to international standards. And so that's why I thought that it's important to clarify for you in this video what bias indicators are. It's also useful for everyday knowledge. So bias indicators are objective facts or circumstances by which probable bias motives can be discerned, but they do not necessarily prove that the offender's actions were motivated by bias. So in accordance with that, international institutions, including the European Court of Human Rights, do not expect the authorities to draw the conclusion at the end of the criminal procedure that a hate crime was committed, that there was bias motivation behind the criminal conduct. It's not an obligation of result, but it's an obligation of duty. So one single bias indicator results in the obligation of the authorities to efficiently prosecute the potential bias motivation. So it does not mean that one bias indicator is sufficient to prove that the offense was motivated by bias, once again. What are the bias indicators and how can we categorize them? And the perspectives of categorization can be the perception of the victim or witnesses, the appearance of the victim, the appearance of the perpetrator or the perpetrator's profile, the place or time of the commission of the crime, and some other factors. Now, I want to take them one by one. So what about the perception of the victim or the witnesses? Well, the perception of the victim and the witnesses is very significant. The fact that they do not recognize, so the victims or the witnesses do not recognize a crime as an offense motivated by bias should not be handled by the authorities as a reason for precluding the potential bias motivation. Why? Because the victim might feel shame for the affiliation with the target group. Let's say that we are talking about a member of the LGBTQI community who has not come out yet. Or the victim might try to decrease the negative impact of the offense by understating the case. It was not because I'm a Roma person. It's not because I'm a woman, and so on. And the perception of the victim and the witnesses might differ, and therefore all perceptions must be revealed and documented by the investigative authorities. Okay, another bias indicator, appearance and verbal expressions of the perpetrator of the offense. Hate crimes are message crimes. So that means that the offender aims at threatening not only the victim, but the whole target group, sending out the message that they are unwanted in the society. And therefore, the perpetrators tend to express the bias motivation during the offense. All kinds of racial, homophobic, or xenophobic slurs, defamatory statements can be heard at the scene during the commission of the crime, or particular signs, symbols can be left behind at the scene, like a swastika or bias-related slogans. Those can be painted on houses as graffitis, for example. And these kind of symbols can appear on the outfit of the perpetrators themselves. So, let's say particular scripts like white power on the outfit would qualify as a bias indicator. Verbal expressions at the scene must be handled cautiously, since defamatory speech can result from the conflict situation, so it might easily be that the bad words are not because of bias. Unfortunately, defamatory words are part of negative talk in themselves, and they do not necessarily prove bias motivation. There are very strong bias indicators, but investigative authorities should strive for taking all necessary measures to reveal potential bias motivation by taking into consideration all bias indicators, not only verbal insults, because that might not be enough as an evidence in the court. So, based on all the bias indicators detected in a specific case and additional factual evidence, can a conclusion be drawn on the dominant motivation behind the offense and its legal qualification? What about the appearance and attitude of the victim? Discriminatory selection of the victims is frequently based on their appearance, which reflects well-known stereotypes like Orthodox Jewish black outfit, or a pink t-shirt on a gay guy, or foreign language, dark skin, and so on. The attitude or the place of residence of the victims can also imply their affiliation with a certain social group and make them a target of the offender. So, for example, if it's about an attitude, then it might be like a feminine tone, or a location which is in a Roma-populated area, or at an asylum reception center. So what about the bias-related profile of the perpetrator? The investigation into the profile of the perpetrator is highly significant in a potential hate crime case. Biased attitude of the perpetrator towards the target group, the victims groups, generally appearing in her everyday life, can be a strong indicator, a strong bias indicator. These can be like posts and contents posted on the social media by the perpetrator, or a membership in an extremist organization, or relevant decoration, all kinds of books and diaries found at the home of the perpetrator. So these kind of potential evidences need to be investigated upon by the authorities. So I mentioned extremist groups. I want to emphasize with regard to extremist groups that the contribution of extremist groups to the offense is in itself a bias indicator. However, this does not mean that we need an extremist group's involvement in order to have a hate crime. So there can be lone perpetrators who do not belong to any organized extremist group. And then I already mentioned asylum reception center or Roma populated area of a township, and on that track I want to come back to the location of the offense, which might be a bias indicator in itself. So the offender himself or herself may visit a particular place which can be connected to the target group, especially in order to find members of the group who can become the target of the attack. This place may be a place of worship or of a religious group like a synagogue or a mosque. It can be the office of an organization who are providing assistance to the target group, let's say an NGO dealing with asylum seekers. But it can be a special events location like the Pride March with regard to LGBTQI people, or a club preferred by homosexual people, a gay bar. And not only the place, but also the time might be important. So a date and time which is important in the life of the target group, like a religious holiday, can enhance the biased feelings of the offender. And apart from that, the relevant event, like the celebration, can provide a perfect opportunity for the offender to find members of the relevant community. Another bias indicator is the brutality and particular means and methods of the offense. The aim behind a hate crime is frequently to humiliate not only the direct victim, but the whole victim community. So therefore, brutal violence or particular means and methods applied with the purpose of humiliation, like urinating on a homeless person or soaps left behind on the scene. But when it comes to brutality, then physical attack by a baseball racket. So there can be a purpose of the perpetrator behind the act to dehumanize victims through those means and methods, and therefore they can become and should be considered as bias indicators. Publicity of the offense is very important since these are message crimes, as I mentioned earlier. So in many cases, the perpetrator or the perpetrators or the extremist group which is committing the crimes, they want to send out a negative message to the society as a whole, and particularly to the victim group itself, that they are not wanted in the society and they should be aware of potential future attacks. That's exactly why hate crimes are very problematic with regard to the impact, because it's they have much broader impact than the direct impact on the victim who was attacked. In addition to that, it in most of the cases increases the fear in the target community that their members can be any time of the day, they can become future victims, direct victims of attacks. So because of that, these perpetrators and extremist groups strive for reaching out as broadly as possible to the public. So it's not rare that all kinds of photos and videos connected to the crime or posted on social media or the website of the extremist group. These sites and social media needs to be thoroughly monitored by the investigative authorities. One route for that is not only this intention to send out the message to the society and the victim group, but also that the perpetrator sadly takes pride of the attack. So the last bias indicator I want to mention here is the lack of other motivation. So when there's no other motives, like an interpersonal conflict in the past between the victim and the perpetrator, they don't even know each other at all, or economic gain, because it's clear that no money was taken away from the victim, so it's not a robbery case, then it can raise the suspicion in the investigative authorities that bias motivation might be behind the crime, especially, of course, if additional indicators are there and are detected by the authorities. In case of mixed motivation, where bias motive is not the only one motivation, the offense should be qualified as a hate crime if the bias motivation was the dominant motive behind the attack. And this is actually a specific standard set by the European Court of Human Rights in a Hungarian case that is referred to on one of your slides, which is the Balázs versus Hungary case. Feel free to check out those cases. I brought in more detailed way, the Hungarian cases, the 3 Hungarian cases on the slides, not in order to demonstrate that Hungary would be like extremely or primarily problematic with regard to hate crimes. You see that there are other cases referred to on the slides. So unfortunately, it's a European and a global phenomenon. In many cases, the problem with these crimes are the reluctance of authorities to consider appropriately and diligently bias indicators and the potential bias motivation, and thereby there is a problem of latency in the case of these crimes. But I would stop it here. My sole purpose with this video was to explain to you what bias indicators are, and I hope that now it's all the slides are clear for you. Let me know if you have any related questions. Have a nice day.